Perfect. Okay. Yeah. So today I'm going to talk in 20 minutes about my habilitation project, Phenomenological Psychopathology of Dementia Diseases. And I'm very sorry for that. That full project in 20 minutes. Obviously, I focus today. So I start with an easy question. What is phenomenological psychopathology? And I want to do it today in 3 steps. So I focused a lot, and I hope you still hear me well. So I would like to start with Carl Jasper's General Psychopathology from 1913, which is quite fundamental, since he addressed or he emphasized in the introduction that he's going to do or lay down the ground for inter and transdisciplinary framework. So it's not just about different perspectives from different disciplines. Additionally to that, he did both a reflection on the connection between psychopathology and psychiatry, so theory and practice. He was well aware of the existential dimension of mental illnesses, which suits very well, I guess, with the basic idea of values-based medicine. And he introduced phenomenology in a broader sense to psychopathology. It's a groundbreaking work. But what I want to stress is that he has a descriptive understanding of the phenomenological method, and he lacks a life world account. So if you look at the first chapter of his book, you will find concepts stemming from Husserl, most of them, and then filled in like boxes with first-person descriptions. And what is missing here is a structural interpretation of these findings. So because of that, I was focusing on the phenomenology of the life world. This is my second step today. First of all, because I don't know how common knowledge it is a highly influential concept in the philosophy of science. And its structural approach to lived experience, exactly what I need today for the idea of my project. So the terminus a quo, so the starting point of each investigation are the life worlds in plural, but what he's aiming for is the terminus a quem, the life world in singular. So it's really about, it's really about invariant structures of the life world. This is his transcendental account, and this maybe is already an obstacle for application in our field, the intersection between philosophy and health sciences. And one interesting point is that it's barely applied to life sciences in general. So we have this strong tradition of phenomenological psychopathology, but nonetheless, when it comes to the full spectrum of life sciences, it's barely applied, this life world theory. So the task out of this introduction is to combine both strands in the light of current approaches, and I just give you 3 impressions. It could be a list, an endless list, so to speak. First of all, the notion of structural pathology, psychopathology from Giovanni Stangelini, and I just quote the idea of it. It is about grasping the underlying characteristic modification that keeps the symptoms meaningfully interconnected. And so I would like to emphasize 2 things here. First, the strong emphasis on symptoms. So it's all about starting with the symptoms. It's like the basis of psychopathology. And there are movements which trying to move away from this symptom-based idea of psychiatry. Yeah, I guess you know the program of RDoC. And the other part I would like to stress is meaningfully interconnected. So it's about the relation of the symptoms in a structural sense. And today I will do exactly this in a short spotlight when I will reflect on memory, orientation, and language, its interrelation in Alzheimer's dementia. That's the last part of the presentation. So the second impression, in the light of the phenomenology of illness, one could say that dementia diseases are not only neurodegenerative diseases of the brain, but psycho and social generative illnesses of a person in its social environment. And I think this idea Carrel stresses here, that like the difference between disease and illness is perfectly fine with the Husserlian and the Jaspersian scheme and understanding of the applied modes of phenomenology. And so of a person in its social environment, this will pop out in a third impression, a quotation from Stephen Sabat. Maybe you wouldn't say he's a phenomenologist, but I think his spirit is a phenomenological one. And he's a really crucial figure in the, so to speak, the horizon of phenomenological inspired research in dementia diseases, which is, there's much to do, I want to stress today. Until now, two very important considerations, here I quote, are virtually ignored. The inner life of the person diagnosed and the social situation in which the person lives. So it's referring to the main paradigm which is used in dementia disease. And I will take a few minutes to reflect on that in the next section of the talk. So, what are dementia diseases? In approximately 3 minutes. And I really, be a bit superficial here, but I think it's good to know the basics. So first of all, dementia diseases are an umbrella term for a plethora of different diseases with different causalities. For example, normally the notions of dementia and Alzheimer's dementia are sometimes used quite equivocal, but Alzheimer's dementia is some kind of a form of a dementia disease. Dementia diseases are an umbrella term, but Alzheimer's dementia is the most common and maybe the best known. If you want to characterize these diseases, they are age-related, they are chronic, they are progressive, and they are irreversible. So, heavy combination in existential terms. And so, because of its age-relatedness, there is a rising tendency or like growing numbers for people directly affected by dementia disease. Today, it's 15 million worldwide. In 2030, there are approximately 80 million, so a strong increase. And indirectly affected are families, friends, obviously, doctors, carers, therapists. What I want to stress with that is that I guess, especially in the age societies, for example, like in Germany, where the demographic change already took place, dementia diseases are in the middle of society, but philosophy is not, philosophy is always a bit behind, but I think in terms of phenomenological psychopathology, we should and we have to focus on dementia diseases. So, if we want to understand the syndrome, I like to start a bit uncommon for phenomenologists from this generic definition. So it's not here, it's not AD, it's dementia. And for me, it's a good starting point because my whole project is about understanding the life world experience related to the symptoms and figure out their structural interconnectedness. So I'm just reading, dementia is a syndrome due to the disease of the brain, usually of a chronic or progressive nature, in which there is disturbance of multiple higher cortical functions, including memory, thinking, orientation, comprehension, calculation, learning capacity, language, and judgment. So, and this is really iconic for the leading paradigm. I want to say a few words, like the dominant paradigm in dementia research. By the way, it's founded in the 17th century, or at the move from the 17th to the 18th century. And if you want to characterize it, it's deficit oriented. So just already the term D/mens is showing us, is indicating this this orientation. So it's the negation of mens. It's naturalistic. So instead of saying demens, the DSM talks about neurodegenerative diseases, but it's obviously another reduction. It's cerebrocentric, simply because that it is assumed that it's a syndrome due to disease of the brain, and maybe in this causal model, that's proper and fine. But if you want to understand dementia diseases holistically, we can't focus just on the brain. It's about the embodied person in its social cultural environment. And as we already could read, it's cognitivistic. So it's basically reduced to cognition most of the time in most of the studies. So you could ask, okay, what's about the emotional, the values-based, so to speak, quality of the experiences? What is about a volition? And it's mnemocentric. So it sounds a bit weird maybe to you to put it in that word, like a dangerous focus on memory, but it's a chain of argumentation connect to what I call mnemocentrism. First of all, especially in the cognitive sciences and philosophy, so my field, dementia diseases are reduced to memory. The second step is that there is a misconception or a much too narrow conception of memory is in place. So it's focused on reflective forms of memory. But as you might are aware, phenomenology really stresses the meaning of embodied memory, for example. This is crucial for phenomenology of dementia. And to this reflective memory capacity is the term identity, or is the foundation for identity if we go with the Lockean tradition. And I call it dangerous because then the equation goes like, if dementia are a memory disorder, then the source, the primary source of identity is missing, and the solution or the obvious consequence out of this is people with severe or progressed dementia don't have personal identity, maybe are not persons anymore. And I think from the phenomenological point of view, this is, I think, one of the biggest discourses in the phenomenological field, and it's proven well that you need other concepts than reflective memory to make sense of identity. So the task is, if you want to say it a bit sloppy, it's about broadening the scope. And this is what I want to do in the last section of my talk. So, a structural psychopathology of Alzheimer's dementia. I focus today just on Alzheimer's because otherwise this talk would be endless. And I want to focus on the threefold loss of memory, orientation, and language in Alzheimer's dementia. And this is the part where it gets a bit tricky and you need to focus a lot to don't get lost. So I first start off really short, condensed descriptions about the symptoms of memory, orientation, and language, respectively, their decrease in Alzheimer's dementia. So first of all, we have a loss in the capacity in working memory. So you will have difficulties in maintaining conversations and interactions. You will have problems, especially in the beginning, in short-term memory. So this normally leads to searching and forgetting, and this causes conflicts, frustration, but could turn out to be like a bedrock for other mental illnesses like paranoia or depression. So it's a full picture, and I just focus here, but you have to keep in mind that dementia diseases are interrelated to a lot of other mental illnesses. And in terms of long-term memory, new contents can be learned less easily. And this is really important for the discourse in phenomenological psychopathology. Old contents can be activated selectively. This is shown by the notion of embodied cognition or embodied selfhood, embodied memories. So the second loss is the loss of orientation. We have, especially in the beginning, there is a sudden loss of orientation taking place, which leads to feelings of confusion, insecurity, anxiety, worries, etc. So it's a long list. And they could be potentially traumatizing. So they have an immediate effect on the person itself in terms of how they live their lives in future. Behind that, I guess, is a progressive loss of the ability to orientate. And this is quite important for the last section of the talk we are approaching. Places, times, people are mixed up, confused, forgotten. And here you see it's not just spatial disorientation, it's disorientation in space, in time, and sociality. So I will stress it in a minute again. And because you can't say where home is, and maybe you lose the feeling of being home, there's a strong urge to move and some kind of existential homelessness. This is a topic from a famous German literate I just reflected on in a paper. So the third loss is the loss of language in Alzheimer's dementia, which occurs almost 100% of the time. Maybe because language is it's obvious to us when language problems appear. It's obviously an enormous challenge for communication and interaction, both in private and professional contexts. It affects speech production and comprehension. I will differentiate between these two in a second. And quite important for what follows, semantics and pragmatics are significantly impaired. So, and now this is an idea attached to the notion of structural psychopathology. Giovanni Stangelini is mentioning it with relation to Eugene Minkowski. We have to look for a trouble generator. I mean, it could be more like a hypothesis than a substantial thing really taking place, but for me today, I want to propose indexicals as a deficit indicator in that meaning as a trouble generator. So they indicate what the trouble generator is. And here, I'm very sorry, it's a German scheme, but I will explain it briefly, and I think it's so to say, self-explaining until a specific degree. If we start in the middle, you see something like me, just schematically, and with red, with red text highlighted: I, you, here, she, and so on, like the personal pronouns. And in the middle, above my head, so to speak, it's the deictic. It's called the deictic centrum, the I, here, now. So, and these three dimensions in this deictic centrum are displayed in that scheme. You see in green on the bottom the time dexes you could think of back then or soon, and in blue the spatial dexes there and here, or maybe different ones like left, right, above, below, and so on. And the first important point here is that we use indexicals to orientate us in space, in time, and in a social level. And the second important thing is to mention that this is called what we see here is a situation. And there is a important distinction from Karl Bühler, a linguist of the 20th century, early 20th century, between situation and context. And for the concluding part is now important, or the thesis is that indexicals are working for persons with dementia diseases quite well in a situation, but they less and less work good in terms of context, which means something like data, names, like general information which has to be learned and is basically symbolically acquired. So for this thesis, I have some evidence from everyday life and empirical work. A big study from Almor et al. From 20 years ago. They saw that indexicals are used more often but are less well understood. So what does that mean? On the other side, You have studies that are showing that what Carl Bühler has termed the I hear now center of subjective orientation. Maybe I go back. You see it here, the middle, right? I hear now. This center and this orientation is preserved even in the late stages. You could figure out by verbal indexicals, but pointing gestures too. And here an impression from Christine Bryden. A real difficulty in speaking is words like we, they, I, you, here, he, when I have to work out who is doing what, that to whom. So here is about understanding language, and I think it's a perfect evidence for what Almo and others have found, that indexicals are used more often but are less well understood. And two other sources. There's a really interesting study from Lars Christer Hedin and Erik Nielsen. They found that there's a less success in referring to a permanent social unit, such as a partnership. It was their example. If one of the partners has a form of dementia diseases, by use of the pronoun we. So I will explain in a minute how to holistically understand all these findings. And the last evidence is the mini-mental state test. It's a most commonly used test, testing basically orientation by language. And you see here in brackets, it's about date, month, season, year, floor, town, state, country. So we could indicate by indexicals to that. If we say today, what day of the week is today? We have to understand contextual knowledge and integrate it into the immediate situation we are in. And the same goes with information, contextual information about the spatial situation I'm in, which floor, which town. So, for example, it's not evident to me that I'm in Cologne. I have to know it, right? There could be hints in my immediate situation, but I have to know it. And exactly this is the problem. So we have a weak cognitivistic interpretation from Almo et al. Saying all these observations are related to the impairment of working memory and semantic memory. And it's obvious that high-frequency pronouns replace low-frequency nouns to make conservations possible. So this is for the speech.
Erik,
yeah?
Just to let you know, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Perfect. I'm fine in a minute. Dankeschön. And so for me, it's much more interesting to offer a strong structural interpretation. And this is in a generalized form and with relation to this differentiation between situation and context. The ability is affected to mentally transcend the current situation and integrate contextual information about space-time sociality in this current situation, right? So it's about, and it's shown in declarative forms of memory, in the spatial disorders, in the language disorders. And I think this is a nice way to synthesize these findings, right? But it's just one piece. And this was my talk. And this is my last slide. And this last slide is an invitation to join our transdisciplinary approaches to dementia and aging network. And really thank you for your time and your patience with me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erik. Thank you.